They laughed when he walked into the courtroom, a black teenager, underestimated and dismissed. But by the time he spoke, every smirk turned to shock. This isn't just a story. It's proof that intelligence, courage, and truth can dismantle bias and change everything. In a courtroom filled with doubt and quiet mockery, a 17-year-old black teen steps forward. They think he's too young, too inexperienced, too small to matter. But what happens next will leave everyone stunned and teach a lesson about courage, truth, and justice that the world needs to hear. The courtroom was silent, except for the sharp tap of the judge's gavel, a sound that should have signaled order, but instead felt like a drumbeat of dismissal. In the center, a 17-year-old black teen named Marcus King stood, hands trembling just slightly, the weight of the room pressing down on him. His neatly pressed shirt and modest slacks couldn't hide the nervous energy in his posture, the way his sneakers scuffed the floor when he shifted his weight. Around him, attorneys whispered to one another, papers rustling like static, eyes darting with barely concealed amusement. The gallery was packed with townsfolk who had come to witness the spectacle, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly judgmental. And then it happened. A smirk from one of the lawyers, barely concealed but loud enough to slice through Marcus's concentration. "Are you really going to speak, boy?" the lawyer sneered, a venom wrapped in mockery. Laughter bubbled up from the room like a tide, stifling and suffocating. Marcus felt the sting, a sharp flash of humiliation that cut across his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had rehearsed this moment in the quiet of his small bedroom, in the dim light of his desk lamp, where he pored over case files his parents had insisted were too complicated for someone his age. And now, standing in the epicenter of skepticism, he inhaled, grounding himself in the rhythm of his heartbeat, reminding himself that fear had no place where truth waited. The judge's eyes narrowed, brow furrowed in curiosity, perhaps irritation, at the audacity of a teen daring to speak. Marcus began to explain, voice steady, deliberate, each word measured. "Your Honor, if I may." Another chuckle erupted from the opposing counsel, a sharp, condescending laugh that seemed to mock not just Marcus, but the very idea that intellect and age could coexist in this room. But Marcus's mind, honed by months of relentless study, blocked the noise. He spoke of facts, timelines, inconsistencies in witness statements, details overlooked by the lawyers themselves. Each sentence was a careful step across a tightrope of scrutiny, yet delivered with clarity that demanded attention. The courtroom, once raucous, began to shift subtly. Eyebrows lifted, heads turned, whispers spread, low but undeniable, as the gallery started to sense the weight of what was happening. Marcus wasn't just a teen talking. He was unraveling a case with precision that made the seasoned attorneys blink in disbelief. Laughter faded, replaced by a growing, tense curiosity. The smirks on the lawyers' faces stiffened into forced expressions, their confidence starting to crumble like chalk on a blackboard. Marcus's hands, once trembling, now moved with purpose as he pointed out a critical discrepancy, something the prosecution had overlooked, a missing timeline in the forensic report, a witness who had misremembered crucial details. And as he spoke, the room's energy changed. The skepticism that had been so heavy a moment ago began to dissolve, replaced by an uneasy recognition. This boy, underestimated and dismissed, held the key to truth in a way no adult had seen. Outside the courtroom, the summer sun poured through tall windows, dust motes dancing like tiny witnesses to the unfolding drama. Marcus's voice never wavered, each revelation delivered with the quiet force of someone who had spent nights lying awake, questioning, analyzing, refusing to accept injustice. And in that courtroom, under the fluorescent glare and the weight of doubt, a silent shift began, a subtle, almost imperceptible realignment of power. The room had laughed at Marcus King, but Marcus, in turn, was about to make the room listen. Marcus King wasn't born to courtroom battles or legal tomes. He grew up in a modest apartment 2 blocks from the city's worn-down library, where the smell of old paper and dust mingled with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the cafe next door. His mother, Denise, worked double shifts as a nurse, her hands calloused but gentle, her voice steady even when exhaustion made her eyelids heavy. His father, a mechanic, had passed when Marcus was 12, leaving behind a toolbox, a set of faded baseball cards, and a quiet wisdom that Marcus carried in his chest like armor. Every evening after school, Marcus would sit by the window with his textbooks open, a small lamp illuminating his face, tracing the lines of logic and law like a cartographer mapping unknown lands. He was the kid teachers called too serious or overachiever, the one who noticed patterns in numbers, inconsistencies in stories, and connections in history that others dismissed. But at home, he was just Marcus, the boy who laughed at bad puns, who argued playfully with his little sister about who ate the last cookie, who carried bruises from basketball games and scraped knees as proof he was still a kid at heart. School wasn't always easy. Some teachers underestimated him, assuming that quietness was ignorance or that youth equaled naivety. Other students laughed at his obsession with details, his insistence that facts matter more than popularity. There were nights he cried silently under his blanket, the unfairness of the world pressing in like a weight on his chest, the sting of racial bias, small jabs, offhand comments, assumptions, that reminded him he existed in a world that didn't always see him fully. But it was in those quiet moments, in the solitude of reading case files or analyzing arguments, that Marcus discovered a strength deeper than any fear. He learned patience. He learned observation. He learned that dignity wasn't just about how others saw him. It was about how he carried himself when no one was watching. And when the call came that a local case had become tangled, overlooked, mishandled, Marcus saw an opportunity, not for fame, not for glory, but to step into a role he had prepared for without ever realizing it. This wasn't just about law. It was about justice. He spent hours in his small room, piecing together timelines, cross-referencing witness statements, drawing diagrams on scrap paper, sometimes with ink-stained fingers, sometimes with a pencil so worn it splintered under his grip. His notebooks were filled with meticulous notes, margin scribbles, questions marked with stars and exclamation points, hypotheses that he tested and retested until the logic was undeniable. And yet, for all his intelligence, Marcus remained deeply human. He feared failure, feared humiliation, feared being dismissed yet again. He worried about letting down the people he loved, about proving the world's prejudice right. But he also believed in the power of truth, in the quiet authority of evidence, and in the idea that knowledge could overturn assumptions. That belief carried him like a shield as he stepped into the courtroom, knowing that every eye would be on him, every sneer would be measured, every doubt would be tested. The boy from the apartment near the library, the one who had felt invisible in hallways and classrooms, was now standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a room that had underestimated him. And though his heart raced, and though the shadows of past dismissals lingered like ghosts in the corners, Marcus felt something else rising, a calm determination that whispered, "You are ready. You know what to do." The courtroom, once a stage for whispered amusement, became a crucible of tension. Marcus's initial explanations had been met with disbelief, a ripple of condescension that threatened to swallow him. But now, as he continued to articulate the overlooked threads of the case, the air itself seemed charged, waiting for a verdict before the truth could speak. The lead attorney, a man named Harold Gaines, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk frozen on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had been certain that the boy would fumble, that a misstep, a stammer, a single overlooked detail would allow the professionals to reclaim control. Instead, Marcus moved with precision, citing witness statements and inconsistencies, challenging assumptions that had gone unexamined, exposing gaps no lawyer had dared to notice. "Your Honor," Marcus said, pausing deliberately. The witness claimed he saw the defendant at the corner at 7:15, but the timestamp on the security footage shows 7:42. That's a 27-minute gap where no explanation exists. The courtroom murmured, a soft wave of sound, disbelief lacing the air. Gaines muttered something under his breath, dismissive, but the judge's gaze lingered, sharp and calculating, weighing every word. Other attorneys exchanged uneasy glances, papers shuffling as they tried to anticipate Marcus's next point. And then came the subtle but unmistakable bias, the kind that isn't overt but cuts deep. One of the jurors, a man in a crisp suit, shifted in his seat, eyebrows furrowed, whispering to his neighbor, "He's just a kid. Let's not get carried away." Another juror rolled her eyes at Marcus's careful diagram of the scene, a gesture that made him tighten his jaw, his fingers brushing the edge of the sketchpad as if drawing strength from its familiar weight. Laughter still echoed faintly in corners, nervous, unsure, but enough to remind Marcus that the room hadn't fully respected him yet. Gaines stood, leaning over the counsel table, voice dripping with skepticism. "You're overstepping, young man," he said, eyes narrowing. "This isn't a classroom exercise. This is serious law, handled by professionals." But Marcus didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. He met Gaines's gaze with calm clarity. "Respectfully," he said, "I'm presenting facts the professionals overlooked. If the evidence contradicts your theory, that's not overstepping, it's truth." The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the judge, who had watched countless arguments, raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Then the witnesses. One by one, as Marcus questioned discrepancies, their confidence wavered. Details they had assumed were solid began to fracture under his precise observations. The air grew electric. Bystanders, family members, reporters, community members leaned forward in their seats, sensing a shift they hadn't expected. Some murmured encouragement. Others exchanged skeptical glances, unwilling to admit they might have misjudged a 17-year-old. Gaines's smirk faded, replaced by a thin line of irritation. His colleagues whispered frantic corrections, trying to regain control, but every attempt Marcus made to clarify a gap, every timeline he reconstructed, chipped away at their authority. The tension was palpable. It wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a study in human arrogance being confronted by raw intellect and preparation. And in that charged atmosphere, Marcus felt the quiet surge of his own confidence. The very bias that had sought to diminish him, the laughter, the smirks, the underestimation, became fuel, sharpening his focus, steadying his voice. By the time he presented the final piece of the puzzle, a detail hidden in a small, overlooked notebook from the scene, a timestamp no lawyer had thought relevant, the room was silent, every eye fixed on him. For the first time, the full weight of his capability registered in the faces of those who had doubted him. The courtroom that had laughed at Marcus King was now listening, really listening, to the careful, meticulous unraveling of a case they had assumed was beyond a teen's grasp. Marcus could feel the weight of the room pressing down again, heavier this time, like gravity had shifted to center on him alone. The initial disbelief had evolved into cautious scrutiny, the subtle sneers replaced by sharp, measured gazes. But the obstacles were far from over. Gaines, now fully aware that underestimating Marcus was a mistake, leaned into aggression. "Objection," he barked, pounding his fist lightly on the counsel table, the sound reverberating like a warning. "This is speculation. A minor should not be allowed to lead the interpretation of evidence beyond the proper analysis of trained professionals." The judge raised a hand, eyes flicking between Gaines and Marcus, a silent challenge to see how the boy would respond under pressure. Marcus's fingers gripped his notes tighter, his pulse steady despite the rising tension. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, voice calm but firm, "the evidence speaks for itself. I am simply connecting facts that have been overlooked. If a professional has missed them, it does not invalidate their existence." Whispers filled the courtroom again, some supportive, some incredulous. A reporter in the gallery scribbled furiously, capturing every precise word, sensing that a story far larger than a single courtroom drama was unfolding. Every step forward Marcus took revealed more complexities. Witnesses wavered under his careful cross-examination, inconsistencies in their statements emerging like cracks in a facade. A police officer, called to clarify the chain of custody on a key piece of evidence, faltered under Marcus's calm questioning, revealing a lapse that would have gone unnoticed if not for the teen's attention to detail. And yet, with every breakthrough, a new barrier appeared. Gaines would interrupt, smirk, misstate facts, attempt to intimidate. Some jurors murmured under their breath, openly doubting Marcus's credibility because of his age. A few gallery members frowned, unsure if decorum allowed a teen to dominate legal proceedings. But Marcus had learned patience in long nights of study and reflection. He let each interruption pass, answered every question with clarity, using every layer of bias and distraction to sharpen his own reasoning. Outside the courtroom, the summer sun had shifted, casting long shadows that crawled across the floor, marking time as Marcus methodically dismantled assumptions. Every layer of challenge, the prejudice, the arrogance, the procedural complexities, became a piece of the puzzle he was solving with unflinching focus. He paused, taking a breath before delivering a revelation that would shake the room. The timeline, when reconstructed properly, he said, shows the defendant could not have been at the alleged location at the claimed time. Furthermore, the surveillance footage that was dismissed as irrelevant actually corroborates the witness's later statement that was previously considered unreliable. The facts align perfectly when the full picture is examined, which had not been done until now. A hush fell, so deep that even the shuffle of papers sounded intrusive. The judge leaned forward, suddenly alert, while Gaines's jaw tightened, his attempt at maintaining composure faltering. The jurors exchanged glances, some whispering, some wide-eyed, as Marcus had done what no adult had done. He connected disparate, overlooked threads into a coherent, undeniable truth. But the teen still faced the most insidious obstacle: human doubt. Age, race, and the expectation of failure were invisible chains that threatened to undermine his revelation. He could sense it in the skeptical looks, in the muttered doubts, in the subtle tension of the room that had initially laughed at him. And yet, Marcus had prepared for this too. He leaned in, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence, walking the room step by step through his reasoning, anticipating every counterargument, exposing every flawed assumption, leaving no corner for doubt to hide. Each obstacle, prejudice, professional ego, societal expectation, fell away one by one, stripped by the force of meticulous logic and undeniable clarity. The courtroom, once a place of ridicule, had become a theater of revelation. And Marcus, though still a teenager with a racing heart and a mind alive with nerves, stood at the center, a master of truth commanding attention through intellect, persistence, and dignity. Marcus's eyes scanned the courtroom, noting every subtle reaction: the shifting weight of jurors, the tightening of Gaines's jaw, the flicker of curiosity in the judge's eyes. Then came the moment he had prepared for, the pivot that would transform doubt into awe. He held up a small piece of paper, a notebook page from the night of the crime, overlooked by every adult in the room, dismissed as irrelevant. "This," he said, voice steady, "is the key everyone has ignored." He walked slowly to the evidence table, each step deliberate, commanding attention without arrogance. He placed the page down, pointing to a sequence of timestamps and annotations that, when aligned with the previously overlooked security footage and witness testimony, revealed the undeniable truth. The timeline didn't match the prosecution's claim. The defendant could not have been present at the scene during the alleged crime. The gallery murmured in disbelief. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the teen's revelation. The judge leaned forward, eyes wide, absorbing the meticulous connection Marcus had drawn. Gaines's face twisted, an expression caught between indignation and panic. He opened his mouth, likely to object, but no words could undo the clarity of Marcus's demonstration. Every discrepancy Marcus had meticulously traced now formed a complete, coherent picture that shattered the case's foundation. But the twist wasn't just in the evidence. It was in Marcus himself. His calm under pressure, his ability to anticipate every counterpoint, his insight that surpassed years of legal experience, all of it combined into a performance of intellect and dignity. He had taken the very skepticism, the laughter, the dismissal, and transformed it into fuel. Where others saw a boy, he had become a force of reason. "What we have here," he said, addressing the judge, the jury, and the courtroom alike, "is not speculation. This is the factual truth, patiently uncovered, meticulously verified, and undeniable in its logic." Silence enveloped the room. Even Gaines, the seasoned lawyer who had built his career on authority and intimidation, was left momentarily speechless. The courtroom that had laughed at Marcus King was now holding its collective breath, the shift in power palpable. Marcus had not only solved the case, he had exposed a weakness in the adults around him, their overconfidence, their bias, their underestimation of youth and intellect. And as the judge nodded slowly, the recognition of the teen's achievements sinking in, the gallery erupted in quiet applause. Some jurors, embarrassed by their earlier doubt, straightened in their seats. Others simply stared, awestruck by the clarity Marcus had brought to a case that had seemed hopeless. It was a moment of poetic justice, not just for the defendant, whose innocence was now undeniable, but for Marcus himself, a vindication of intellect, persistence, and moral courage. In that courtroom, a 17-year-old had rewritten the expectations of what it meant to be seen, heard, and respected. The twist was complete. The boy they had mocked had outperformed the professionals, not with arrogance, but with truth, patience, and unshakable integrity. And in that revelation, the entire room, attorneys, jurors, and spectators alike, was forced to confront a truth more universal than any legal precedent. Intelligence, diligence, and moral clarity are not measured by age or stature, but by the courage to stand firm and speak truth, even when the world doubts you. Gaines's face flushed crimson, the color of a man realizing his own hubris had been exposed in front of the entire courtroom. His words, once sharp and commanding, now faltered, stumbling over themselves like a house of cards collapsing. The judge, leaning back slightly, adjusted his glasses and let the silence linger for a moment longer, allowing the weight of Marcus's revelation to settle over everyone present. "Mr. Gaines," the judge said slowly, each word deliberate, "it appears that your objection was not only premature but unfounded. The evidence as presented is accurate and has been verified independently." The room seemed to shrink around Gaines, the air thick with a collective judgment of those who had once laughed at Marcus. He attempted to reclaim authority, gesturing toward his notes, clearing his throat, but every eye in the room now carried a subtle, unspoken reproach. Witnesses who had previously aligned with the prosecution shifted uneasily, some nodding toward Marcus, silently acknowledging the precision of his observations. The defendant's attorney, a woman who had quietly supported Marcus's inquiries from the beginning, finally allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The jurors, once skeptical, now sat upright, attention riveted. And then the gavel struck again, a firm punctuation to the reversal. The court acknowledges the accuracy of the evidence presented by Mr. King. The judge declared, "It is clear that the defendant's innocence is substantiated." Furthermore, the court notes the exceptional diligence and clarity demonstrated by Mr. King, which has aided in the pursuit of justice. A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery, approval, astonishment, admiration. Gaines, defeated, slumped in his chair, his earlier arrogance transformed into a quiet, simmering embarrassment. The courtroom that had mocked a 17-year-old now witnessed the immediate poetic justice, the authority figure undone not by force, not by intimidation, but by the undeniable power of intellect, moral clarity, and preparation. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing quotes that would later echo in news stories and social media feeds. Teen solves case professionals missed. 17-year-old exposes oversights in courtroom. Headlines that carried both awe and justice. Marcus's hands, once trembling under scrutiny, now rested lightly on the podium, his calm presence commanding the room without a word. He hadn't sought vengeance, nor had he aimed to humiliate. Yet justice, poetic in its timing, had spoken through his diligence, exposing arrogance for what it was, and reminding everyone that true authority is earned, not assumed. In that moment, Marcus's victory was complete, immediate, and undeniable. The arrogance of a seasoned lawyer humbled by the insight of a teenager, the laughter transformed into respect, and the courtroom itself reshaped as a space where truth and diligence had triumphed. The world had underestimated Marcus King. The world had laughed. And now, the world was listening. The courtroom emptied slowly, the echoes of whispered astonishment lingering like a fading storm. Marcus stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights softer now, the weight of expectation lifting as the murmurs of onlookers followed him. Outside, the sun had begun its descent, golden rays spilling across the city streets, casting long shadows that seemed to honor his quiet triumph. His mother, Denise, stood near the courthouse steps, hands pressed together, eyes wide with disbelief and pride. As Marcus approached, she swept him into a tight embrace, her voice breaking. "You did it, Marcus. You did it." His father's old baseball glove, preserved on a shelf in their apartment, felt like a symbol of resilience and guidance as he remembered the lessons his father had instilled: patience, integrity, courage. And now, standing there, Marcus felt the invisible threads of family and perseverance wrap around him, anchoring him in a dignity that no courtroom prejudice could ever touch. Friends and neighbors who had followed the trial's progress erupted in quiet cheers and congratulatory handshakes, some holding out phones to capture the moment, others simply nodding with genuine admiration. Marcus's sister, eyes shining with tears, grabbed his hand, whispering, "You showed them. You really showed them." And yet, the true closure was more than applause and recognition. It was the knowledge that the system, flawed as it was, had bent toward truth, not because of a title, a suit, or years of experience, but because someone had refused to be invisible. Marcus felt a quiet swell of empowerment, a recognition that diligence, preparation, and moral clarity could carve space for justice, even in a world eager to dismiss him. The case itself, once tangled and overlooked, now stood resolved with precision. Witnesses were cleared of uncertainty, the defendant's name restored without a stain, and the integrity of evidence reaffirmed. But beyond legal victory, Marcus carried a personal triumph: the quiet affirmation that youth, intellect, and courage could confront bias, arrogance, and doubt, and emerge with dignity intact. In the days that followed, the community celebrated not just the case, but the example Marcus had set. Teachers shared his story as a lesson in perseverance. Neighbors recounted the courtroom drama with awe. Local media highlighted the teen who refused to be dismissed, whose attention to truth had reshaped the expectations of adults around him. Marcus returned to school not as the overlooked student, but as a beacon of possibility, a living testament that careful observation, preparation, and moral courage could overturn assumptions and illuminate justice. And in that personal and communal closure, he discovered the final truth. Dignity isn't granted by those who underestimate you. It's claimed by those who refuse to be silent, who speak the truth even when all eyes are skeptical, who act with integrity when the world doubts their ability. The laughter of the courtroom had faded, replaced by respect. The fear of failure had dissolved, replaced by confidence. And the boy who had been underestimated had become, in a profound and lasting sense, seen. The sun dipped low over the city, bathing the courthouse steps in a warm, amber glow, a quiet reminder that even the longest shadows eventually give way to light. Marcus King stood with his family, friends, and neighbors, a circle of support that had grown around him, strengthened by the courtroom's revelation and the undeniable truth he had brought to bear. And in that moment, the moral of his journey became clear. Justice, integrity, and courage are not measured by age, appearance, or the expectations others place upon you. They are defined by the willingness to act when the world doubts you, to speak when silence would be easier, and to persist when dismissal seems inevitable. The story of a boy laughed at in a courtroom transcended one trial, one city, one moment. It became a universal call to see potential where others see limitation, to listen where others dismiss, to act with fairness and diligence when the easy path is to ignore. Community members began to speak not only of the case, but of what Marcus had shown them, that change, accountability, and empowerment are born when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice as permanent. Local schools invited him to speak, not as a celebrity, but as a mentor, a reminder that observation, preparation, and moral courage can shape lives and societies. The newspapers ran headlines that echoed far beyond the city, inspiring young people everywhere to question, to learn, and to assert their voices even when authority seems immovable. And Marcus, quiet yet resolute, understood that the journey wasn't about accolades or fame. It was about showing that intelligence paired with integrity could illuminate truth in a world too often clouded by prejudice. As he looked around at the faces of those who had cheered, some of whom had doubted him only hours before. He realized the lasting power of example. One person's courage can ripple outward, creating spaces for dignity, respect, and justice in even the most unlikely places. Don't underestimate anyone, he thought, the simple truth resonating like a bell in the evening air. And never let anyone underestimate yourself. The story of Marcus King, the teen laughed at in court until he solved the case better than the lawyers, became a lasting testament, a call to action for every community to nurture potential, to honor truth, and to empower voices that might otherwise go unheard. Injustice, bias, and dismissal are challenges, but they are never the final word. When courage, preparation, and moral clarity meet opportunity, the impossible becomes visible, the unheard become powerful, and justice, in its most poetic form, prevails. And in that triumph, the world is reminded that real strength is not in age, title, or authority. It is in integrity, persistence, and the unwavering belief that truth, no matter how inconvenient or unexpected, will always demand to be heard. Marcus King's story reminds us all, no matter your age, background, or how the world perceives you, courage and preparation can overturn bias and bring justice. Share this story, honor resilience, and never underestimate the power of speaking the truth. Justice starts with one voice. Will you be next?